Says Michael Popak, Legal AF, don't be fooled. Donald Trump does pay legal fees. He just pays them out of his Political Action Committee, PAC, and pays it to people that matter to him, including witnesses, co-conspirators, and co-defendants, so they can pay their legal fees. That is the dirty little secret that's going on with all of these co-defendants, indicted co-conspirators, unindicted co-conspirators. What do they have in common? Their individual law firms are all getting paid by the Trump Save America PAC. It's gotten so bad that Jack Smith, special counsel, special prosecutor, has listed as one of the grounds to avoid letting Donald Trump know about any aspect of the investigation in advance, that he may tamper with witnesses and tamper with evidence because, as they pointed out in their federal filings, because Donald Trump has a penchant for paying off, buying and paying for legal representation for people that could testify against him. That could lead to witness tampering charges along the way. But let's look at the facts, and then we'll talk about where they lead. In the $50 million or so that Donald Trump has paid to the co-defendants, the following people that I'm going to identify for you that are involved in the Jan 6 election interference cases, the Georgia election interference cases, the Mar-a-Lago cases, testimony given to the Jan 6 committee, all have taken money from Donald Trump because they've let their lawyers be paid from the Save America PAC. That includes lawyers that have now are representing different people and now have a conflict. And I'll talk about the conflict of interest as well. Let's start with what happens when Donald Trump buys and pays for testimony. Unless the people decide to stop wanting to get paid for their lawyer fees or stop having their lawyer fees paid for, they toe the line and they cooperate and they don't say bad things against Donald Trump. The best witnesses that we've heard about so far in any of the cases, Cassidy Hutchinson, former chief assistant to the chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Yacine Taveras, the former IT director at Mar-a-Lago, currently Molly Michael, former executive assistant for Donald Trump, both in the White House and at Mar-a-Lago. Once they break free from being represented by Donald Trump's bought and paid for lawyers, they then tell the truth, cooperate with the government, and become witnesses for the prosecution and witnesses for history. And that's what happens. And that's what Jack Smith is watching carefully to see who he can flip, because his ability to flip a witness is undermined in part because those witnesses worry about where their legal fees are going to be paid for or paid from. As soon as they're freed, Yacine Taveras said that he perjured himself in front of the grand jury about Mar-a-Lago, is now cooperating with Jack Smith, and now we have the second indictment in Mar-a-Lago. Cassidy Hutchinson was testified to the Jan 6 committee that she was told by her Trump bought and paid for lawyer, Stefan Positano, not to tell the truth, to not remember certain things that she said she remembered. She even testified that she was offered a job. This is how nefarious this has gotten with Donald Trump. He's not just buying their silence through paying for their attorneys. He's offering them jobs that look on the face of them to be sort of independent, but they're not. For instance, she testified, and she's let it be known, that Red Curve Solutions, a company that received $4.2 million from the Trump PAC just before they made an offer to Cassidy Hutchinson, before she was about to testify, to have her work for them. That's a Trump-created job to try to entice her to not testify against him. So I thought, for instance, Donald Trump complained, I don't know Cassidy Hutchinson. I don't know. She seemed nice, but I don't really know her. And I don't know what she could say. Well, why are you trying to influence her testimony by donating money to another consulting company so they can offer her a job? Okay, so that's what we're seeing. So keep your eye on the ball when I tell you all the people who's having their lawyers bought and paid for by Donald Trump and his PAC. Peter Navarro, obviously. Walt Nauta, obviously. Ray Smith, indicted in Georgia, a lawyer for Donald Trump, having his law firm bills paid for by Donald Trump. Cleta Mitchell, a lawyer that was listed in the Jan 6 in the special purpose grand jury report from Georgia, as the people that they recommended be indicted. She's an election lawyer that went MAGA, and has been the focus of a number of prosecutions. And she and her attorney's fees are being paid for by Donald Trump. Todd Blanche is representing Boris Epshteyn and having his bills paid for by Donald Trump. Boris Epshteyn, the in-house counsel, fixer, consigliere for Donald Trump. In addition, a number of Jan 6 witnesses, including Bill Stepien, the former campaign manager for Donald Trump, had his bills paid for by Trump as well. Bill Barr, also Lindsey Graham, reimbursement to his PAC for the law firms that Lindsey Graham needed, because he got involved, of course, in the co-conspiracy and the conspiracy in Georgia. So we have that. We've got Steve Bannon's law firm being paid for $3.4 million by Donald Trump's PAC. Stephen Miller, aide in the White House, key witness and part of the election prosecutions. His law firm, Greenberg Traurig, paid by the Save America PAC or the PACs. Corey Lewandowski, a key figure for Donald Trump, had his attorney's fees paid for. Lynn Wood, who's now cooperating with the Georgia prosecutors, at least we think he is, although recently he came out with something on social media that says he didn't flip and he's 117% in favor of Donald Trump. Very weird percentage offered by a very weird guy, but former lawyer Lynn Wood had his legal fees paid for by Donald Trump. And then you've got the obvious sort of incestuous ethical conflicts that arise from law firms representing Trumpers and MAGA people. And then when those people break free, they could be cross-examining their former client on the stand, creating an ethical dilemma. For example, Scott Grubman, who is representing currently Ken Chesebro, the now disgraced constitutional law scholar that's been indicted in Georgia. Scott Grubman used to represent Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, who obviously is cooperating with Fani Willis's investigation. And so that's one of the reasons in the list that Fani Willis just filed of the 18 witnesses for the prosecution, you see many overlaps between people that used to take money from Donald Trump to pay their legal bills and those that no longer. And we know, again, as I said at the top of this hot take, as soon as witnesses get out from under Donald Trump and refuse his payments, they start telling the truth. Cassidy Hutchinson, no finer witness against Mark Meadows and what happened leading up to Jan 6th in the White House and beyond than Cassidy Hutchinson, whose new memoir is out called Enough. But we have a new Cassidy Hutchinson, Molly Michael. Molly Michaels, which I'll do a separate hot take on, not only worked with Donald Trump as his executive assistant, his right-hand person in Mar-a-Lago, she did it on Jan 6th as well and in the White House. She was the gatekeeper for all the scheduling to set up who would or would not see Donald Trump at any given time. She just happened to be, I'm not making this up, running errands on Jan 6th, so she wasn't there until late in the afternoon when all the chaos had already started. But Molly Michaels is now cooperating with the feds, cooperating with Jack Smith, and I'm sure ultimately with Fani Willis as well. And she has a lot to say that's unimpeachable about Mar-a-Lago and Donald Trump and his making his own personal decisions to hide, obfuscate, destroy, alter evidence, records, national defense information, top secret classified documents that should have been delivered to the National Archive, to the federal prosecutors and the FBI pursuant to federal court order. And she knows everything about the movement of those boxes. And she knows everything about Donald Trump's involvement in picking out which of the documents and boxes he would send to the National Archive, he would provide to his lawyer, Evan Corcoran, and which he wouldn't. And that's the kind of witness that as soon as they crawl out from under having their bills paid for by Donald Trump, because she no longer works for Donald Trump, then and only then do they start cooperating with the government. I'm going to follow witnesses, the trail of money and legal fees through the Save America Trump PAC and otherwise, only one place, exclusively on the Midas Touch Network. You're watching me right here, right now. If you like this, on Wednesdays and Saturdays, I also do a podcast at the intersection of law and politics with two of my co-anchors, Karen Freeman Agnifilo, Ben Meiselas. We call it Legal AF. It's what you think. We curate the best stories like this at that intersection and bring them to you in a 1-hour podcast called Legal AF. If you like this show, leave me a thumbs up. Open up a comment with me. We'll start having a dialogue. And until my next hot take, until my next episode of Legal AF, this is Michael Popak reporting.
Hey, Midas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at Midas Touch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.
Here with me now is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Thank you for coming in. It's nice to see you. We are less than 7 days now from a potential government shutdown. How seriously is the Biden administration taking that possibility?
Well, look, this is something that can and should be prevented. So the administration, as always, will be ready for anything. But look, Speaker McCarthy and the president made a deal. They made a deal earlier this summer. And by the way, it wasn't an easy deal. I mean, just from the transportation side alone, it meant us accepting cuts that Republicans were demanding to programs that we wanted to use to fund more roads and bridges and airports. But we made that deal, and all we're asking is that they live up to that deal. A shutdown would include, just in the transportation side alone, shutting down air traffic control training at the exact moment when the country recognizes the need for more, not less, ATC staffing, and when we finally got cancellations back at or below normal rates. That's just one example of a shutdown that would mean service members wouldn't get paid. Coming back to transportation, the air traffic controllers who would be working in the towers, they wouldn't get paid. They're under enough stress as it is doing that job without having to come into work with the added stress of not receiving a paycheck. So the American people don't want to shut down. From what I can tell, the Senate is ready to go. The administration is ready to go. House Republicans need to come to their senses and keep the government running.
You talk about what would happen when it comes to air traffic controller, the training, those who are being trained and also those who are actually working now. But what would it mean for passengers?
Well, look, one thing that we have been through a lot of is disruptions, right? Those disruptions are largely caused by the weather, but sometimes it can be because of staffing issues. That's exactly what we're trying to grow the workforce. This would stop us in our tracks. In January, there was an outage of a critical IT system that the FAA has been working to modernize. A shutdown would slow down our progress modernizing technology at the exact moment when we need to do it. And again, I'm just giving you some examples out of the transportation space across the country. So many impacts would be felt. This has to be avoided.
You mentioned the deal that the president and the House Speaker cut a few months ago. Have they spoken about this crisis right now?
I don't know the latest time that they've spoken, but I think the president's position is very clear. And by the way, there's also been a dialogue going on about making sure that there's measures to keep the government open that have things like disaster relief in them, that have things like support for the FAA to be able to get through some of these issues that the FAA is facing. By the way, you mentioned passengers. Another thing that grinds to a halt in the event of a shutdown is the work that we've been doing to have rules that get passengers refunds when they get delays. So I think a lot of times, sometimes in the rhetoric in Washington, anything that isn't the military gets talked about as if it's just faceless, meaningless bureaucracy. We're talking about real work that protects Americans, everything from food safety inspections to the rules that we're working on to hold airlines accountable. We have all of these parts of the government for a reason, and Americans expect Congress to keep that up and running and keep the lights on.
And you mentioned that there's some daycare centers like
Absolutely,
yours
yeah,
that are going to close.
To take just one example that hits pretty close to home for our household, but more importantly for people across the country, and that whether we're talking about federal workers or just people who, parents who are depending on WIC benefits might be waitlisted instead of being able to support their kids. And I would add, the shutdown is being used by some House Republicans as leverage to get budget cuts over and above the deal that was made, which would also have an incredibly negative effect on
They didn't like the deal in the first place.
Yeah, but think about what this means for transportation. Again, obviously I'm speaking mostly to what's in my lane, but some of the very same House Republicans who were lining up to try to make a partisan political issue of air travel disruptions, are proposing cuts that would make it harder to modernize our systems. Some of the very same House Republicans who are lining up to try to make the pain of the people of East Palestine, Ohio, into a partisan political issue would cut railroad safety inspections. It makes no sense.
President Biden is planning to join the auto workers who are striking. He's going Tuesday to your adopted home state of Michigan. Donald Trump says that President Biden is only going because he had planned to go on Wednesday. Is that part of what's going on here? President Biden trying to draw a contrast?
No, President Biden is doing what he has always done, which is to stand with American workers. He is proud of being